Welcome back to the Solid Signal Podcast. We are halfway through July, and July is halfway through the year, and it's 2019, which is almost 20% through the century. So consider ourselves in a bit of free fall as we move from place to place all together, watching the world of technology expand and change and grow in ways that we could never have expected. This week's podcast is technology related, I will say, but probably not direct technology stuff. Sometimes I like to do sales pieces for solidsignal.com because, after all, solidsignal.com does pay the bills for this podcast. And sometimes I just like to go off the rails on stuff that I like to think is kind of close to what we talk about. After all, it's not always about business. This week I want to talk about Major League Baseball's blackout rules. I should say first that I'm talking about Major League Baseball because Major League Baseball is on television, and television is something that television services is something that we sell at solidsignal.com. So there's your tie-in. But back to the issue of blackout rules. It's hard to find a new angle on the issue of blackout rules because it's all been covered over the last 60 years. At the same time, I feel like it's time to bring it up again. A quick Google search revealed that I couldn't find a whole lot of discussion on this subject since around the time of the last World Series. And that's a shame because I think it's something that we should, as baseball fans, be talking about on a fairly regular basis. No, this is not the most important thing that's going on in the world today, and I understand that, but this isn't that kind of podcast, folks. This is a podcast for people who like Solid Signal products, and I understand that if you are going to say there are far, far worse things in the world to be cranky about, I do understand, and I wish you great luck and success finding another podcast that will address those issues. We're here to talk about TV. Anyway, as I'm sure you were aware if you are listening to this podcast, Major League Baseball's blackout rules are just flat out ridiculous. It means that, for example, folks in Las Vegas sometimes can't watch games that take place in San Diego. And if you're not from around that area, that's about a 6-hour drive between the two. Blackout rules in all sports were originally intended to make sure that and this almost sounds kind of funny, that team owners didn't go bankrupt because of television coverage. That sounds just patently ridiculous, I would say. Patently ridiculous. And there are some bits of history that kind of go along with that. You know, remember when baseball and television first met, television was all about broadcast, and it was all 100% free. It wasn't really until the 1980s and early 1990s that we started seeing television on cable TV and these kind of extremely lucrative deals to try to make sure that that baseball was getting covered on cable effectively. And at that same time, you saw, team owners really aggressively expanding the stadiums and paying more and more for talent. It became much more of a money-oriented game, especially around year 2000. But blackout rules still exist, despite the fact that nobody is saying that MLB is doing poorly. As a matter of fact, Major League Baseball rakes in an awful lot of money in general, and for its owners, it rakes in a ton of money. Not everybody who's associated with the league rakes in as much as the owners and the players, I grant you. And blackouts actually could potentially hurt, the guy or lady who's selling hot dogs and beer in the stands, except they don't. Because if you want to go to the game, you go to the game. If you want to watch the TV, you watch the TV. There really isn't, it's not like there's a kind of a decision tree there. You want to stay home, you want to stream it, or you want to go to the game. And they're different experiences. And we know that. We know that after 60 years of talking about it and watching it. And that's why blackout rules are stupid. NFL got rid of blackout rules. And while the NFL itself has other problems, blackout rules aren't one of them. And I would propose that baseball should get rid of blackout rules for a couple of reasons. First thing is, just kind of that general fairness, nod to the fans kind of thing. If you want to continue to encourage the game, you have to have more people see it, and that means not blacking it out. Second thing is that blackout rules are stupid. As I said, they often cover extremely large areas and don't necessarily apply to local teams in the sense that local means anything at all. So probably the biggest thing, though, is that we should be looking for ways to put more baseball on free television, and blackout rules don't help that. Television has never been, a free thing for Major League Baseball. Stations have always paid for coverage. It's not that they haven't. But now you find they pay more and more and more. And of course, now you pretty much have to have a cable subscription in almost every market in order to watch Major League Baseball, unless you're, willing to limit yourself to just a few games. And this has gotten to a point of ridiculousness, I would say, in markets like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the biggest market with this problem. If you're a Dodger fan, and there are other teams in the LA market that you could be interested in, but if you're a Dodger fan, then you can only watch Dodger games on Spectrum. You can't do it on DirecTV. You can't do it on Charter. You can't do it on, you can do it on Charter because Charter is Spectrum. A little slip of the tongue there. I meant to say you can't do it on Comcast. This is unfair, but it's not that there's a law or a rule. It's just the amount of money that Spectrum is asking, since they have the deal. It's too much for some of these other carriers, and it's driving people to streaming, where you can still, by the way, stream off, away games, just not the ones that are blacked out. It's not super fair, I gotta say. And why is it not super fair? Because of all places, Los Angeles the city itself pays a lot of money for the Dodger games to actually happen. The city of Los Angeles gave some pretty big tax breaks to the Dodger organization in order to keep them. And LA handles transportation, parking, police enforcement, all sorts of things to try to make sure that the city stays safe and keeps going while the games are in progress. And yet, if you don't have a cable subscription, you can't watch Dodgers baseball at all. If you don't have Spectrum, you can't watch Dodgers baseball at all. And half the time, your games are going to be blacked out because of these silly blackout rules. I would say that a really fair thing would be, first of all, get rid of the blackout rules altogether. And second of all, if you're dealing with a city that is giving a lot of money to a team, that they should have a clause that requires that team to air its games on broadcast television, so 100% of local residents can get it for free. And folks, I'm not talking about government action. I'm not talking about, people would say that's socialism. And again, that's a different blog, folks. That's not the Solid Signal blog, I'll say that. But what I'm talking about is, team owners have an organization. They work together. And there are organizations of mayors of large cities. And they should all work together to make sure that this kind of rule is enforced everywhere, so that Major League Baseball, which I happen to find to be the most enjoyable of all the sports and the least tainted by some of the scandals that have taken place recently, although, obviously there was the whole steroid thing in the 90s and whatever. But I think it's the cleanest. I think it's the most enjoyable game for me. And yet it's one of the hardest to watch. There's a ton of baseball. I mean, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of games. And most of them just can't be watched. Even if you pay for MLB on DirecTV, on Dish, on streaming, you'll find that your local games are just blacked out. And that's just flat out stupid, folks. So I may just be one little blogger with one little podcast, and my voice may not matter for much. But let me first say, first and foremost, get rid of the blackout rule. Do something for the fans, and let's make Major League Baseball the kind of sport that we always wanted it to be, something for everyone.